I did have the Australian Federal Police with me, people screaming at me and standing over me, an enormous amount of online abuse. I was spat on.
Welcome to Indy Eye. We have a very special guest today, Zoe Daniel, who is the former community federal member for Goldstein and former ABC foreign correspondent. She is also a consultant, author, and community activist. Zoe Daniel, welcome to Indy Eye.
Thanks for having me.
Now, The Age reported recently that you actually feared for your life during the election, so much so that the AFP accompanied you for some of that time. Is that correct?
Yes, I did have the Australian Federal Police with me quite substantially through the election campaign, particularly obviously when I was out in the community and at events where there were large crowds. And certainly they were around during pre-poll and they were with myself and my team throughout election day itself.
Why do you think that you were targeted in some way?
Look, I think the nature of the campaign in Goldstein was particularly tense. It's a highly contested seat. It's a very febrile environment. And there were, as well as the Liberal Party itself campaigning against me, there was a range of associated proxies involved in the campaign who were distributing advertising, both in the digital sphere, but also outdoor advertising and into letterboxes to paint a particular picture of me in order to influence the election. And I think that really exacerbated the social cohesion tensions that were pre-existing within the electorate. So the nature of the environment was everything from people screaming at me and standing over me in the street. I was doxxed. My car was with its number plate was distributed online. An enormous amount of online abuse, obviously, and I was spat on.
Good grief.
And yeah, there was just a whole range of things. Certainly closer to the election, there were letters put in letterboxes of my supporters accusing them of being anti-Semitic, describing the environment as akin to 1930s Germany. And since the election, people who have supported me have also had letters in their letterboxes saying that they're not welcome in our community and that they should move. So the whole range of things, which were, I think, if not designed, some of them might have been designed to make me and my supporters feel unsafe, particularly
Yeah.
those letters,
Yeah.
but not designed to make us feel unsafe. Certainly the net result was that everyone felt pretty edgy.
And so it's fair to say it's pretty toxic, really, what was going on there. Um, why do you think? Because I wouldn't say, from what we've observed anyway, that would be indicative of other or many other electorates. I think that's fair to say. Why do you think that was heightened in Goldstein?
Well, I think that if there was one electorate that was somewhat similar, not exactly the same, it would have been Kooyong.
Yeah.
And I think that, the obvious similarity is that you have had two female community independents running in Goldstein and Kooyong, and a particularly highly contested campaign by not only the Liberal Party itself, but also the proxies wanting to get those seats back. And unfortunately, I think that just the nature of public discourse now, particularly with the way that people engage with us with each other, and
Yes.
also with MPs on social media, is starting to overflow into the street. If anyone looked at my social media feeds, they would see the abhorrent abuse that I get, and a lot of MPs get that. I think the concern
And
is that
journalists, by the way.
and journalists,
Yeah.
yeah, and I had that as well when I was a journalist working in the field. Um, and I think that, over time that becomes so normalized that people start to think that they can treat you that way face to face as well. And certainly that's sort of what I saw during the campaign at some level. But I would love to be able to explain why it was so toxic. And I think, look, anyone in my electorate who was closely observing the campaign would acknowledge that it was toxic.
Yeah.
And it was also very visibly personal. Billboards all up and down the Nepean Highway targeting me by name in a really misleading way in terms of attack advertising. And inevitably, some of that will land with some people. So
At the same time, I think, I'm interested in this idea of whether particular areas of policy were at the heart of it, or whether you think it was just a general kind of smear campaign, because I believe at the same time that you were, I think, exercising, a measured response towards, for example, what's happening in Gaza. Tim Wilson took out ads, I believe, in the Jewish news at least, announcing himself as a proud Zionist. How do you think that impacted on people's, understanding of those issues or what was going on at the time?
look, I think that when it comes to me, obviously I was an international journalist. I've done a lot of reporting when I was a foreign correspondent, focused on humanitarianism and people who are affected by conflict. I've spent a lot of time in refugee
Asylum
camps and
seekers and so forth. Yeah.
in refugee communities, and so I came to even the 2022 election with a humanitarian position around the Palestinians, and that was very much weaponized against me before the election in 2022 in terms of things that I'd said or particular kinds of reporting that I'd done. So I think that was already sort of set up, that framing was set up against me. And then, the horrendous events of October 7, 2023 were then sort of re-weaponized against me in terms of what my positioning is. I actually think that my position on Israel and Gaza is a very mainstream position, which is that the Israeli government should follow international humanitarian law and the rules of war, and that the central aspect of that is protection of civilians, and plainly that has not happened. And also that a two-state solution is the only pathway to negotiated peace between the two parties, and neither of them will have peace, safety and security until they're able to come together to negotiate that. That's my basic position. So it's really unfortunate. And indeed, many people in my electorate who are very supportive of the Palestinian people would say that I wasn't front-footed on it enough because I have a large Jewish community in my electorate. But in fact, I was in the background pushing the government really hard to, for example, restore humanitarian funding to make sure that aid reached people in Gaza, as well as pushing the government to act against anti-Semitism, which is absolutely happening in our community. So from that point of view, I think I have a very reasoned, probably pragmatic, but also humanitarian position towards both sides in the conflict. It's unfortunate to see that weaponized, not only against me, but also probably my biggest concern about that is weaponizing the pain of people for political gain. And I think that's really unfortunate.
The other side of that, I think, is that while it is, we believe that to be, as you say, quite a reasonable sort of, well, I don't know if reasonable is the right word, but I believe you said middle ground position, it's hardly, rebellious
controversial
or radical in any way. Or extreme, but certainly that hasn't been, I don't think that that's been echoed in Australia's media. And while that has changed, it has shifted visibly in recent months. There was a long period there, I believe, where that wasn't reported accurately, what's actually happening there. And the emphasis has always been on October 7, which of course was horrendous. and no one is saying that it wasn't, but I don't believe that was um, represented fairly in the media here, which is quite disappointing from our perspective. But I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Do you think that that's a fair assessment, that perhaps while that's happened elsewhere, um, that kind of accurate reporting hasn't flowed on in Australia?
The media thrives on a fight of any kind. The nature of our media currently is that it's all based on conflict. That's what gets eyeballs and sells newspapers, in the sort of historical sense.
Yes.
And I think that unfortunately that creates on a range of issues, not just this one, really binary conversations where I think that with most things, there's a sort of a middle position which acknowledges both sides of the conversation. There are very few issues where you have a fully one-sided position about something. With most things, you can see that there are two sides to it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the media sort of chooses not to report that because it's not particularly interesting to them. And audiences, who drive that demand go for the sort of conflict-based type of reporting. And in this case, it's really unfortunate because there are legitimate obviously concerns, but also fears and anxieties
Yeah.
among both communities who are affected by this. And those things
Absolutely.
need to be treated very gently and delicately and acknowledged for all of those people who are in some way personally affected and struggling with this. So that kind of media coverage, which both feeds into and sort of guides and responds to the political debate, is really unhelpful. And you saw very often during the term of Parliament after October 7, those issues being weaponised by both sides. And when I say both sides, I mean the Greens and the Coalition
Yeah.
in the chamber for, I would argue, political purposes.
Yes.
And I don't think that was helpful from either perspective, because all it does is inflame fury and hatred within communities and prevent people from being able to actually see the other side of the conversation. And that can be really difficult to do when people are being killed. That can be really difficult to do, but that's what we have to do.
I think also this, it's fair to say that people are becoming increasingly polarized, this idea of left and right and not much in the middle. And of course that plays into some of our media, some of our media's approach to, we could possibly say majority, approach towards news and towards certainly opinion based information, and opens up this kind of area of exploitation for people such as, I think, Donald Trump, who has leveraged that in his own campaign, I think it's fair to say. I'm interested in your thoughts on that. First of all, in that kind of media exploitation, but also Trump's rise and kind of what's going over there now, what's going on over there now in the US in terms of detaining US citizens in the name of immigration policy and so forth. But there's probably a lot of questions there. So, but
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Sorry, so we could probably break it down.
No, I think that, look, covering the election of Trump in the first Trump administration, because I was the US bureau chief for the ABC during Trump's first election and during the first 3 years of his first presidency, was probably, if not the key motivator, one of my key motivators for running as an independent. I had real concerns not only about Trump himself. He's an arch populist, and so in many ways I sort of agree with thesis that he's not necessarily a Republican. He'll just go with what's popular and what he thinks resonates with people, and he's not sort of ideological in a political context. But he really zeroed in on the fragmentation of truth and trust that we've sort of been talking about in relation to what's happening in Australia in regard to the media, politics, and in the most recent case study, Israel and Gaza, but also around COVID and all sorts of other examples that you could use. And he basically managed to land his message of being the disruptor with people who are so frustrated with the system and what they think is the lack of leadership that they're getting and the lack of engagement from those who are leading them, to say, you know, as Donald Trump, I'm someone who can disrupt that system. I'm someone who can change everything by doing quite wild things like, you know, throwing tariffs on, you know, all sorts of countries and closing borders and things like that. It's this sort of radical politics, so that the subtlety and the ponderousness of the normal political environment, which is that everything happens quite slowly. And one thing that I've learned over the last few years is that it's quite hard to get things done. Like, it's every single small things, like turning an aircraft carrier. But Trump doesn't do that. He just cuts straight through and says, we're just going to do this now.
Yeah.
Consequences be damned. And some people, and you look at his base, I mean, it might have shifted a little bit since the most recent US election because of some of the things that he's been doing. But in general, his base has been rock solid. And a lot of those people who I spoke to during the 4 years that I was covering Trump are not necessarily Republican voters. Some of them are just people who want disruption, and they're prepared to tolerate his flaws for the sake of the change that they thought he could bring. And, you know, you saw that through the duration of the first administration. He held his base through the intervening period in order to get elected again with an increased vote. And so it's sort of an open question, what happens now? You know, does he continue to hold that group, or do they start to drop away because he's overstepped? You know, from a sort of theoretical point of view, it's absolutely fascinating and very interesting. Obviously, from a practical point of view, it's quite terrifying as well in terms of the state of the world.
And I think, you know, this idea that, you know, that I'm interested in this idea that the media are often presenting, not just in the States, but obviously in Australia, which you know, we're concerned with today, are presenting his kind of often unhinged rants in a perfectly reasonable manner, as though that's something that, you know, all leaders do, and, you know, they're perfectly reasonable. And I feel that, you know, with everything going on at the moment, we've got the key takeaway, it seems, from the G7 was not, you know, everything that's going on around the world and how that was kind of approached, but the fact that Trump left and elbow missed his meeting, which I find absolutely extraordinary. That could be the thing that everybody focuses on. You know, he's been snubbed, I believe is how it's been termed. So I feel as though, you know, the media, and, you know, you are a journalist, and you were a journalist, and I don't know whether you ever give that title up, but you understand how that kind of media frenzy plays out. And I wonder why that is the case here, because, you know, surely with Dutton having positioned himself as a Trump supporter, certainly in the early stages of the election, and that not working out for him, you would think that the media here might shift their position, in some way to actually reflect the reality of what's happening in the States and with Trump. I don't know. I'm actually quite bamboozled by
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think you've got two things competing there. You've got what's the really easy headline and the sort of clickbait piece, and the gotcha moment, which
Yeah,
is ha ha ha, Trump snubbed elbow. That's embarrassing, and that's a really neat narrative, and it's something, you know, arguably it's lazy, but it's easy. It's a very easy framing. It's something that um, consumers of media can grasp really quickly. And I must say, as soon as I saw it flash up on my phone that Trump was leaving early, and that the meeting wasn't happening, I thought, oh, this is going to turn into the, Trump snubbed elbow kind of, like,
yeah,
it's so obvious.
yeah,
And also I was imagining being a fly on the wall in the Prime Minister's room when he was told that Trump wasn't going to be there for the meeting, because they would have gone straight to that as well. Like, oh God, this is going to look embarrassing.
yeah.
At the same time, though, I do think, I mean, inevitably, the more wild and also sort of wildly impactful Trump's decision making becomes on the world, the more you are seeing deeper analysis and questions being asked in the commentary in the Australian media.
Mm.
It's just that, that's buried on page 25 in the opinion section rather than, Trump snubs elbow, which is on the front page. And
Mm.
it's only people like you and I, and probably people who are listening to this, who are going and looking at that and reading it. And there's some decent stuff around. Like, I think it is improving in terms of um, the way the media analyzes Trump. And look, certainly, because obviously I've been a close observer of Trump, and I wrote a book
Yeah,
on Trump from my
that's right.
time covering him, that, the fact checking of Trump and the sort of accountability that the media imposes on Trump is now vastly better, obviously, than it was back at the start of his first administration, where all of us were just struggling to get a grip on it because it was like Trump's stream of consciousness all the time. Um,
Yet he's back.
yes, and so it's sort of, it's an evolution, but the thing is that at the end of the day, the way global media works now is kind of like we're all participating in some sort of soap opera, and it's sort of entertainment. And a lot of those people who are consuming that stuff around what Trump's done are doing it for sort of entertainment value, while, there's another cohort of people who are going, wow, where's the world going? What
Mm.
impact will this have over time? If the, destruction of the world order, the, potential collapse of NATO, and all the other things that have underpinned our society for a very long time,
Yeah.
and also the US being, in effect, a global policeman, and now seemingly vacating that space in many ways, and just what that means, in
Mm.
terms of unilateral actions by leaders like Netanyahu and others.
In terms of your own political career, I believe you have said that you plan to recontest Goldstein in the next election. Is that right?
No, I haven't committed to it. I've said
Oh,
that,
okay.
I may. I may. I mean, look, um, on a margin of 175 or 88 votes, in the second most marginal seat in the country, I think it would be ridiculous to not even contemplate running again.
Mm.
Uh, and certainly there's enormous support from within the community. I mean, the seats, in effect, are dead heat. So about half of the community would support me to run again. But anything can happen over the next 3 years. And, I need to think through what my contribution would be, and whether that's the best path forward for me as a person, but also, my aspiration is to have impact in leadership on the sorts of things that we've been talking about. And I need to contemplate whether running again is the best way to achieve that, or whether there are
Yep.
other ways.
What are your immediate plans, or are you still thinking those through?
Look, I do feel lucky in that because I was a journalist for 27 years, and I have like a whole range of interests and, I guess, depth of expertise, not only in media but in foreign affairs and other things that I've worked on as well during the parliamentary term in regard to women's economic empowerment, climate policy, and things that are really deeply of interest to me. It therefore presents a range of options around what I could potentially do next.
Yep.
I think anyone who's been in my situation, and look, maybe I'm a little bit different to a lot of people because I'm an independent. I'm not a member of one of the major parties, and so the pathways might be different. But there's a decision-making process which is quite complicated after you exit that building around what to do next, and particularly for someone like me, I'm 52, and I could run again. So trying to keep options open while also moving forward professionally and personally is quite a delicate balance.
Do you think that, having been in Parliament, in some ways, you might be a little bit relieved not to be going back there? Would that be a reasonable assumption?
Look, no. I mean, it was an amazing job. I feel so grateful to have done it, even just for the 3 years. Absolutely loved it. It's really hard work for various reasons. We sort of laughed in our office that, as the independent member for Goldstein, we were responsible for everything from the state of the roads to the war in Gaza and everything in between. And it was our responsibility to fix all those things as well. So it's an incredibly broad remit as a member, particularly as a member of the lower house. And as an independent, because the community independent spends so much time analysing legislation and really in the weeds of policy, you sort of have to become kind of like the minister for everything. You have to know enough about everything so that every vote that you make is well informed and evidence-based and, would provide for the best outcomes for most people. So it's a lot. But also, my biggest disappointment is, firstly, I built a fantastic team and they're great people and incredibly heartfelt in their dedication to being part of the independent movement. But we had a lot of half-done work that's not finished on things like eating disorders, women, violence against women, climate, gambling, a whole range of things, social media policy. And so it would be my aspiration to continue to be a participant in those conversations, either inside or outside the chamber. And then in terms of the nature of the parliamentary environment, well, I think it's better to have more independence in there, and also women, women from professional backgrounds, people from professional backgrounds in there, improving the tone of the debate, and trying to bring the conversations back to the centre. And I think that, if nothing else, with Goldstein having been one of the most safe Liberal seats in the country, is now close to the most marginal seat in the country, that has brought things back to the centre.
Absolutely.
And that's a really important outcome for the people of this community, who are now listened to in a much more reasoned way, I think, and in a much closer way, no matter who's representing them, because it's really embedded not only independent politics in the community, but also the understanding in the community that their vote matters and they can change things for themselves. And they did in 2022, and they've flipped it back this time, and that was their choice.
I think it's safe to say that Tim Wilson better watch out next time round.
So it's good to keep MPs accountable, and MPs in every seat should be accountable and transparent. and said repeatedly in the lead up to the election that that I would fight for every vote. I didn't quite realise I was going to have to fight for every single vote, and particularly for a month of counting after the election. But
Yes.
that's a good outcome. That's a good outcome. That level of rigour, having to really prove performance to the voters is exactly how it should be.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for your comments today. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we may not have covered?
No, that's all good. Thanks,
It's all
Michelle.
good.
Thanks for having me.